Hello everyone and welcome back to the first day of Singapore FinTech Festival and World FinTech Festival India chapter. Our ninth final session of the day is a panel discussion on financing of women-owned SMEs for recovery post-COVID-19. According to the third All India Census of Small-Scale Industries conducted in 2001 and 2002 and subsequent estimates made only 11% of the micro and small enterprises in India are owned by women, while 9.46% of the MSC enterprises are managed by women. Pandemic has further affected these enterprises that were already facing challenges of access to finance, market, information. Now, the situation is further aggravated in case of women-owned micro enterprises that share a substantial burden of low-income households' financial income. To discuss these effects, joined on this panel by Ms. Aparajita Agrawal, Director of Strategy Development, Value for Women Limited, who will also act as a moderator for this panel. Welcome to the panel, Aparajita.
Thank you.
And joining Aparajita, we have Hemant Gupta, CEO of BSC Sammaan. It is good to have you with us here, Hemant.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You're welcome. And completing this panel is Ms. Richa Pant, Head of Group CSR and Sustainability at L&T Finance. Welcome to the panel, Richa.
Thank you so much.
And now, I would like to hand over this panel to Ms. Aparajita to start the session. Over to you, Aparajita.
Thank you. And firstly, thank you everyone who's logged in and is watching us speak. Thank you also to our organizers, UNCDF as well as FinTech Convergence Council, who have helped put the session together. Just a quick note to the organizers: I am getting a terrible feedback on this call, maybe because there is a speaker on somewhere. If you can rectify that, that'll be good. Otherwise, I can hear myself. But just to get things rolling, I think this topic is very close to all of our speakers on this session, because all of us are involved in some way or the other working with micro entrepreneurs and early stage entrepreneurs, and increasingly more with women and women micro entrepreneurs who are trying to create a opportunity for livelihood or build an income opportunity for themselves and their households. So what I would like to do today is to invite both our speakers to share some of their thoughts and experiences on this in this conversation during this session. And I very specifically want to actually go to our speakers to talk about how the pandemic has really affected access to finance for women-owned SMEs. We all know that the pandemic, since the time COVID happened, women have been disproportionately affected by the kind of chores that they've had to do. They've had more burden of care of household chores, and not to generalize this, I think all of us, men and women alike, are going through a very difficult year and a very difficult phase. But we all do know that women, in any case, carry a higher burden of unpaid work. And in a situation like this, where the responsibility for care and the responsibility of running a business, and even if it's a micro enterprise, falls on them, it can be doubly taxing for them. So what I do want to bring up as the first question today was to talk about how do our speakers, and maybe Hemant, we can start with you first. I would love to hear from you. How do you see this disproportionate burden of house and care and domestic chores alongside business affecting micro entrepreneurs, women micro entrepreneurs? And if you can also talk about how you have seen specific examples of building resilience, either through your work or the communities that you work with, that will be great to hear.
Sure. Aparajita, I will try and do justice to that question. So first of all, I think while the pandemic has impacted everybody financially, it has had a greater impact on women entrepreneurs, especially on the small and medium side, not just because of the household burden, etc., but also historically financing for women entrepreneurs has been perceived, unfortunately, as a higher risk engagement. where although commendable work has happened by organizations like LNTFS on building micro or nano enterprises as well as SHGs, but by and large, because of the perceived risks, lending to women entrepreneurs has been low, and the pandemic has tended to aggravate that with the financial institutions perceiving a greater level of risk in such lending. What we've done from our side in some of the instances where we could intervene has been to provide some level of guarantee on the businesses that the women are running, to provide some level of support on the household front, be it in terms of finance, be it in terms of provisions. And the third has been that also provide some level of healthcare support, especially because we found that the burden on the woman was coming a lot more when there was an illness in the family, especially related to COVID. So we've tried to kind of reduce that burden by being able to provide healthcare support through some of our efforts. I think, to my mind, the pandemic actually partly has been a bit of a leveler also, because to what you were saying earlier, there has been greater household burden on the men folk also in this pandemic, and because of the greater perceived risk on by the lenders, it has impacted the women a lot more. So those would be my initial thoughts.
Thank you, Hemant. Richa, over to you, and if you can talk to specific examples that you have come across in terms of building resilience for women micro entrepreneurs, that would be great.
Sure, Aparajita. I was just reading this one of the facts in the Bain report, and I saw that startling piece that about there has been 73% decline amongst the women entrepreneurship ever since the COVID happened, and I think almost about 20% of them are witnessing that their revenues will be wiped out. And imagine that for a rural woman entrepreneur. So the problems are exacerbated by COVID, and we've been implementing a program called Digital Sakhi. Just to share a bit about Digital Sakhi program, it's basically aimed towards empowering the rural women with technology, finance, and knowledge on digital finance, knowledge on basics finance, and knowledge also on various entitlement schemes, which is basically the state welfare schemes or the central welfare schemes that lead to direct benefit transfer. So there's this cadre of women called Digital Sakhis. They go door to door to impart digital financial literacy as well as spread this awareness on the schemes. Second component of this Digital Sakhi program is identifying rural women entrepreneurs into agri and agri-allied trades and do upskilling of them into these particular trades. So during COVID response, we saw that, these rural women entrepreneurs, the household burden that you were talking about initially was too much on them. And in fact, some of them, at the household level, their husbands lost income. Their business of their husbands were impacted. So what we did was we continued to support through CSR grants these rural women entrepreneurs. And also these digital sakhis continue to train them on digital financial literacy, and we also supported them from livelihood perspective. So we pay an honorarium to these digital sakhis. Besides that, if you talk from a sustainability angle, some of these digital sakhis are also becoming entrepreneurs. While the program is just 4 years old and it takes a good 3 years to create an impact, about 30 of them from Maharashtra have shown an interest that they will be running a digital sakhi seva kendra. Now, that's an initiative which we scaled up during the COVID times. Just to give an example of what Digital Sakhi Seva Kendra is. So it's a mom and pop store, which would have typically, a grocery behind it. And at the same time, it will be Wi-Fi enabled. It will have POS machine. It will have micro ATM. It will have the biometric device. It will have a computer, printer, everything which is required to do digital modes of payments transaction piece. So the idea is that, whenever, and especially in COVID times, when people are, going to her and asking for doing payments, she is able to charge a certain amount also. And therefore, she becomes an entrepreneur. This piece we saw, this was not only we scaled up, and there was a surge in demand because she was a digital Sakhi is already now an established role model in the village, and there was surge in demand, especially with regards to UPI payments, and people were going, and her income was stable. Although again, coming back to state that this number is very small, yet. We intend to scale this up. This particular aspect is something that we continue during the COVID piece. As I mentioned, for the rural women entrepreneurs, we continue to also provide them with training and enterprise development program also, as well as provided certain inputs. So typically, just to share, these rural women entrepreneurs are the ones with poultry or with cattle or even tailoring. In fact, I was just, going through a WhatsApp message of my NGO partner called Seva Bharat, and they just messaged me that, what has happened is that our tailoring trade, we saw this as an opportunity and we converted and we told them to stitch the masks. So that became an opportunity. And they earned a good deal of money, and they have also linked up with the Narega. So the Narega livelihood piece is also coming to these women entrepreneurs. So these are certain initiatives that we took during the COVID times to remain active, and some of these women entrepreneurs are doing fairly all right. Digital finance piece, of course, has scaled up like anything. I mean, that's doing really well during these times.
Thanks, Richa. I think that's a great example. And just to double click on that example particularly, have you heard a difference in terms of the kind of demands or asks that came from women micro entrepreneurs pre-COVID to now? Do you hear them asking you about very specific kinds of services that they might be looking at, which are more real because of the pandemic now?
Yeah, sure. So one thing which is part of our Digital Sakhi program, which I was mentioning, was about the welfare schemes. And you saw our Prime Minister, he announced various schemes with regards to COVID also. So there's a lot of demand coming from villagers that, they would want to know about these schemes. And that's the thing that Digital Sakhi wants to get trained on. Secondly, there's a lot of development in the digital finance piece. NPCI, which is our knowledge partner, National Payment Corporation of India, is our knowledge partner. So they've been also evolving and coming up with, so UPI 2.0 has come up, and USSD is being, changed. There are various do's and don'ts that have come up. So digital Sakhis are very keen to understand what are these so that they can start imparting the revised knowledge. See, digital financial literacy module, which we have built, is evolving so much so that there's continuously updates have to be given to the community. And this is something that is that digital Sakhi has to be trained on a continuous basis. So there's a demand to understand more on digital finance piece, especially because UPI has gone up significantly. There's a demand in terms of, upskilling them in the agri-allied trades also. And there's a demand in knowing about COVID-related welfare schemes. So this is coming both from the agri-allied women entrepreneurs as well as the digital Sakhi themselves.
Thanks. Thanks, Richa. Hemant, have you seen a difference in terms of the kind of demand that you hear from women micro entrepreneurs specifically that you work with?
Yeah, sure. So actually, let me break that on the answer into three parts, Aparajita. One is talk about the micro nano entrepreneurs as well as the SHGs. Second, look at the slightly larger enterprises, and then look at the greater than 50 employee kind of enterprises. Historically, our observation has been that there has been a lot more greater number of women entrepreneurs at the bottom of the pyramid. So as you go up the size of the enterprise, then the number of the percentage of women entrepreneurs tends to fall. So while around 30 to 38% of the small enterprises tend to be women run, it comes down to only about 70 to 21% if you go up to, like, let's say, greater than 50 employee size enterprises. And therefore, the impact also has been greater at the bottom of the pyramid. And our observation has been, as Richa very rightly pointed out, women entrepreneurs have shown a greater level of resilience and a greater level of innovation when it comes to finding ways around the problems that the pandemic has shown. And digital finance has clearly been an option that they're looking at a lot in terms of conducting their businesses, especially on the financial side. Some of them actually has viewed it as an opportunity to get away from cash, because cash coming into the house was creating a social problem in some instances. So therefore, they've actually looked at this as an opportunity to go digital. It's a silver lining, if you will, of the pandemic for them. Additionally, Aparajita, if you move up the pyramid and look at the slightly larger entrepreneurs, and if you move from the rural to the more semi-urban or urban settings, there, what we've seen is that there is now a larger demand for starting enterprises. So women are now looking to move away from the malls and the beauty salons and they're looking to actually experiment with a greater level of flexibility than perhaps they were able to or wanted to earlier, right? And we are seeing actually a greater number of people that are signing up for entrepreneurship programs. We are seeing, I mean, like for example, the most recent example is one is on the social development side, but also on the incubation side. One of the things we did in response to the pandemic was to actually do a incubation program for women entrepreneurs, where we took early stage startups, early stage women entrepreneurs, and have recently put them through a 3-month program. And you'll be amazed at the response we got, especially from the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So that just gives you a sense of another way of looking at the impact of the pandemic on women entrepreneurs and how they're embracing digital finance, how they're embracing entrepreneurship as an alternative to employment, as a way of generating income for themselves and their households. Yeah.
Thanks, Hemant. This is, I think there's some great insights here. I want us to also zoom out a bit and say, if we look at the overall context of financing for women-owned MSMEs or micro enterprises, as this session wants us to focus on, where do you see some of the biggest drivers there? And this might not just be in your work, but in the overall sector as you see it, the kind of financing that's available for women micro entrepreneurs. Where do you see some of the biggest drivers and some of the biggest opportunities, or I mean, to that extent, even gaps where new types of financing options or instruments could come in? If you could sort of zoom out and talk about that context a bit for some of our probably audience that may not necessarily be as familiar with how financing for women-owned women micro-entrepreneurs works in India, then I think that will be great. So maybe Richa, you can go first, and then we can ask Hemant to come in.
Yeah, so traditionally, I think for MSMEs and also for the nano ones that we're talking about, obviously there are microfinance institutions that are existing, and there are banks also which are giving loans. But I'll again come back with regards to the issues that are there with regards to access to finance. Again, coming from a grassroots, we've seen that when women approach these financial institutions, especially some of the formal financial institutions, the behavior which is meted out by the staff and towards these women is very, in fact, disrespectful. It's always like, why aren't men folk around with you? So it's all very, how should I say, it's extremely patriarchal society that we live in, and these women have to face a lot of challenges. And given these challenges, this access to capital is limited in terms of reaching out to formal finance institution, and then they have to depend upon the informal. I see a greater role of digital finance here. So technology is an enabler here, and I would see that the access of capital should happen via this use of technology. There are wonderful startups who are working in this particular space. I'm sure that they are being represented here at the Singapore FinTech festivals also, who are working on this particular space. I think that's a good opportunity in terms of looking at access to capital. At L&D Financial Services also, we've partnered with various startups in order to look at how to kind of, obviously we've been disbursing via digital modes of payment, but how collections can also be taken via digital modes of payment. So reducing the cash piece that Hemant was also talking about. Again, so that will help, because sitting at home, if you're able to do transactions, that's extremely empowering. So secondly, which I wanted to just add this attached to the access to capital is also, having access to technology. what is important for a woman entrepreneur in a typical patriarchal setup, she doesn't even have the digital asset. There's no ownership on digital asset as well. It's always with the husband, with the brother, or people like that. So giving her having her own smartphone, in that she's doing digital transactions, that's something which is again very critical if you want to truly a woman entrepreneur to kind of upscale a business and carry on with it. So these are two things that in terms of even access to capital, I think access to technologies are also very critical. And like I mentioned, knowing about various schemes and all also, which are leading to direct benefit transfers, is also something which is very important. Knowing every time on digital finance, something which is very critical. So knowledge, technology and finance, there has to be a combination of these three factors for her to kind of move up the curve and reach out to formal financial institution to gain the capital. This is what I feel, yeah.
Thanks, Richa. Very pertinent points. Hemant, would you like to add on to that?
Sure, I will try, because I think Richa has done a fabulous job of covering most of the aspects. I think if you break financing down into the informal and formal sectors, and even within the informal sector, if you break it down to third-party lending versus friends and family, if you want to call it lending, right? Mm-hmm. And if you break the formal sector down also into microfinance institutions, the banks, the larger financial institutions, the women have, like Richa very rightly put, women have faced issues in accessing finance from each and every one of these channels, right? Whether it's the informal channel or the formal channel. The issues they've faced have been financial as well as non-financial issues, right? And Richa talked about some of the non-financial issues relating to the patriarchal nature of the society, or women being perceived as high risk investment, and I think there has been significant amount of work that has happened in a lot of these channels already, and Richa again touched upon, which is why it's very hard to add on to what Richa said, but she's already touched upon some of the work that's been done. And, like Amit said in the beginning of the conversation, in 2001, 2002, the number of women entrepreneurs in the MSME sector was in the single digits, okay? And the more recent numbers are actually already looking at 30 to 38% in the SME sectors for women entrepreneurs. I think we'll have to start by also addressing some of the non-financial issues. I think it's not just about addressing the financial issues. And I think that is where the work that a lot of organizations like L&T Financial Services, like your organization, Value for Women, you guys have been doing, has been to actually move the needle and make it easier for women to access finance, approach financial institutions, and not just be, get access to money. That's one. The second is that solutions that we come up with, whether it's innovative solutions that startups come up with, in a lot of instances, the solutions get developed in a different social context. Right? They often get developed, let's say, in an urban setting. Whereas when the same solution is replicated in a different social context, let's say in a rural setting, the solutions often do not work as well as they would have worked in an urban setting. And therefore, I think what we also have to look at is to develop solutions ground up in the local social context, not just take a solution from a different social context and apply it somewhere else, if that made sense to you guys. Right. So I think those are the two important aspects that we'll need to focus on. I think like I said earlier, I think we already have made significant strides in terms of the percentage of women entrepreneurs, that SMEs, etc. But I think if we can focus on some of the non-financial issues, as well as develop solutions that are contextual rather than replicated, we'll make, we leapfrog the amount of work that we've done in the past.
Yeah. Thanks, Hemant. I think that's a very important aspect as well. And in my own personal experience, that's one of the areas where we've seen that the intermediaries that work in this space, be it the facilitating organizations or organizations that are responsible for capacity building or even connecting the funders and the entrepreneurs, often use a very broad brushstroke for working with entrepreneurs overall. It may not necessarily be catered to women micro entrepreneurs, for example, or women entrepreneurs who may have a very specific kind of their reality might be slightly different from any entrepreneur out there in the market. So I think that's definitely one of the areas, or like Richa had said, the kind of assets they own might be very different, right? If they don't have, for example, property in their name, where are they going to actually how are they going to fulfill a collateral obligation, right? Or if they don't have a digital, a mobile phone, for example, how are they going to actually be able to control the conversations that they need to drive in the space if they have to do it themselves? So I think those are really real issues that we've seen women entrepreneurs bear the brunt of. In a sense, as intermediaries yourself or as facilitating organizations yourself, do you both see a path on which intermediary or support organizations need to take, or do you see good, strong examples of intermediary institutions, support institutions that could have probably done a much better job of helping women access finance? And this could be grants, this could be debt or equity. It could be across the range, but are there examples that you may want to share either from your work or from areas where you think there is more specialization needed or fine-tuning needed in the way support organizations address this space?
You want to go first, Hemant?
Sure, Richa.
Yeah, Richa, go for it.
Oh, okay. No, so I think that's a very good question, Aparajita. I want to add on a piece there. Basically, I think that one of the challenges again they face is with regards to mentorship, and I feel that that's one collaboration that I've seen some of the organizations doing at a global level. We are looking at some sort of a collaborative framework, which is which has private sector players more from a CSR grant perspective, but state governments also, because there are those schemes existing with regards to access to capital for women entrepreneurs, not-for-profits, as well as multilateral and bilateral funding organizations. So what I'm stating is possibly a collaborative framework between these 4-5 set of agencies that can, look at how to skill these women, because upskilling is continuously very important. Secondly, look at a mentorship program, because, while some of the women, they do have aspirations, but from aspiration to execution, from idea to execution, they need to be handholded on a continuous level. And for that, you need grassroots NGO partners who can do that. I'm again coming back to the rural areas also, but in urban areas also. I mean, all women entrepreneurs, they need to be handholded to some extent so that it can be executed. Again, why I'm stating this is because coming back to patriarchy, we've interacted at them at the core grassroots level. They come back and there is always a hesitancy, lack of confidence, lack of self-esteem that comes in a way that how should I go about it? Therefore, a mentorship program is again very critical. And like I mentioned, so once you have this collaboration, then you always have access to grants. So grants are also important up to from this startup level, let's say to seed capital level. But once there's a prototype created, I think that is the point where you can start looking at formal financial institution from accessing a capital point of view. So I see this particular collaborative framework as a program that can be sustainable and scalable.
Yeah, agreed, Richa, agreed. I think there is a lot more scope for collaboration in this space. Hemant, any points there?
So in terms of intermediaries, Aparajita, our experience has been that the intermediary ultimately is in a way a translator.
Yeah.
Right? He good intermediary, then he's a two-way translator and not necessarily a one-way translator. And we've had instances of very good intermediaries who have done a fabulous job. So for example, there is a village called Sari near Ahmedabad, where we were doing some work for skilling of women. And we were doing a similar job in Sri Perumbudur district in Tamil Nadu, right? And we had two different NGOs or implementation agencies who were doing the skilling or were being effectively, in your parlance, the intermediaries. And we had a far greater success in the Gujarat ecosystem than we had in the Tamil Nadu ecosystem. And we actually had thought it'll be the other way around. And when we did some root cause analysis to figure out why that happened, essentially the community engagement of the agency in Gujarat was far, far greater than the one in Tamil Nadu. And again, I'm going back to the context, right? And therefore, the one in Gujarat was actually able to take not just the women along with them, but take their families along with them. Right? It was able to find market linkages for them for the products they were selling. Right? So it wasn't that the training program was far greater or some of those factors, but it is important that whatever financing you're doing, the enterprise, for it to thrive, has to be in an ecosystem that enables it to thrive. And for that, the intermediary that is helping the enterprise along has to understand the context and has to be able to understand how to translate that context effectively. So the focus should never be just on the enterprise. I guess that's a part of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It has to be. So I think that was a fabulous example. And till date, we've unfortunately not been able to find a very good implementation agency in Sri Perumbudur. We're still looking. So that's not happened as yet. But the Gujarat one is doing well.
Yeah, no, I think thanks for sharing that example. Definitely makes it more real to understand. I think the community engagement piece is quite critical, especially the moment we move out of the metros and look at entrepreneurs that are working with in a more rural context or in a more sort of semi-urban context. So that's definitely important. I think moving on to trying to talk a little bit more about innovations. Have you Richa, I know you talked about the Digital Sakhi initiative. Are there other innovations that either have been on the wish list or where you have seen them working well, especially when it comes to financing for women SMEs or MSMEs?
Yeah. So one thing which we did last year was we did a business plan competition for our rural women entrepreneurs, and it was quite similar to what in fact Hemant does for the their urban entrepreneurs and the cohort that you were talking about, Hemant, earlier. So it was very interesting because it's the rural women entrepreneur whom we taught how to make a pitch in front of a jury at a first block level. Now this particular thing, she had to make a good business plan. Let's say she has a small goatry business, how she is going to scale up from one goat to, let's say, 10 goat and then have a goat farm. So she has to be convincing enough. So we had the jury of different experts from agriculture field, from finance field, from leadership and training aspects of those communications skill field. So she had cleared first block level, then again at district level, and then at a state level. And the state level, we had winners of about 25 winners whom we gave a capital of about 10 lakhs, with the first top 3 winners getting about 1 lakh, the top winner, 75,000 second, and 50,000 the other one. And rest all also got a consolation prize. So this was an innovative exercise because rural women was trained at each level, block level to district level to state level, where she had to make a pitch in front of the Divisional Commissioner of Maharashtra. So, the kind of confidence that was built and the kind of technical skills that was impacted, how one should look at a business plan, what is a profit and loss statement, how you should sell a cause, all the marketing skills. I think that is something that that was very different and innovative, and in fact, we got the due recognition, and we've been kind of, and it's not just capital was given in one go, just because winners are there, so you just write a check. It was also seen that the plan that she had submitted was the capital had to be given accordingly, step by step by. So once she fulfills that one leg, then she gets a certain amount. Another leg, then she gets another amount. So that's how we had planned it. So that is an innovative stuff we had done in the state of Maharashtra. We intend to do it in MP and all also, MP, Odisha also, as the Digital Sakhi project matures in that state. The second piece, which is my wish list, if I have to state, is that there is, like you mentioned, there are so many schemes existing. There are accelerators running for women entrepreneurs, and this is both for urban and rural. There is no single repository where where women know that these are the places where I can access capital from. So I think there needs to be a single repository of information, possibly a database, maybe in the form of app. That these are different schemes, these are different, corporates who are giving grants in terms of for women entrepreneurs, or these are different, agencies who are giving seed capital, or even, angel investors who are looking at, funding them at the idea stage. So there has to be a repository of knowledge, and which can be told to these women via possibly an app or something. So that's something is my wish list, and maybe, in future that can come. Maybe this can be an idea for a startup to look at.
Thanks, Richa. I just wanted to ask you, in the business plan competition idea that you tried out, did you also see financing come beyond the prize money or the initial sort of support that was promised by the partners that were involved? Did you see financing actually? Did you see any interest from sort of new financiers coming in terms of being able to help these women take the business to the next level?
Yeah, in fact, we had banks who were approaching us because they saw that this lady has moved up the curve, and while the grants are supporting her, she initially, now she wants to scale up to at a different level. So a 10 goat farm wants to do a 50 goat farm thing. So now she is reaching out with the formal finance institution, and this is where the Digital Sakhi is enabling that connect to happen. So a lot of because of this initial build that has happened till the state level, the kind of confidence she's got, formal financial institution also see that this is a lady who has a potential, and a particular corporate showed that kind of confidence of investing in her, and now we look at kind of giving her loan to certain extent so that she can further scale up her business. So I think that's something which has become a great connect, both in our, in fact, Maharashtra also, and to some extent even in our Tamil Nadu project that is happening now.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. Hemant, going back to you on the main question itself.
Sure. I'm actually, I think Richa covered the rural setting very well. I'm actually going to switch to the urban setting and see if we can talk a little bit about innovation that we're doing there. So there are, and I'm kind of harping back to the same thing of context. So when we nurture women entrepreneurs, we not just provide them with finance, we actually provide them with coaching and mentorship also. And both of you have actually been parts of the program where we do that. And we are a Mumbai-based organization, and traditionally we have been calling entrepreneurs to Mumbai and working with them on helping them scale and succeed. Last year, we tried something different where we said, you stay where you are, okay? And the support that you need, we'll provide it to you where you are. And we did that for a number of reasons. Some of it was economic, but it also made long-term sense because you're helping the startup, helping the entrepreneur make a relationship which is local and therefore is more sustainable, right? And will hopefully outlast the duration of the program. What of course we did not anticipate is that the pandemic would come and therefore things would become virtual. So to an extent, in today's day and age, at least for now, that local versus the long distance, thing has disappeared. But once we are over this hump, I think that the local relationships, the local mentors, the local coaches that we've been able to find will sustain far beyond the programs that we run, right? And the second thing that we did was that we what happens in Richa's programs, each person is treated as an individual with their own needs, with their own requirements, with their own stage at which they exist. And therefore, the support that's given to them is also customized and curated. And that, to my mind, has been far more effective than running classroom-based programs. Right? And I think Richa hit it on the head. To my mind, from a wish list perspective, we need more data and we need more information about this ecosystem. Like I was saying earlier, oftentimes we simplify it and approach it as a financing problem, but I don't think it's a financing problem. And perhaps we need to do more research, local contextual research on why some of these barriers exist for women to find financing options, being able to scale up beyond a point, right?
Yeah,
I think that's important.
Yeah, I think you did touch a really important point there around data, because I think we were talking about how earlier before the session started, we were talking about how dated some of the data that we see in the space is, and I think one of the things that the financial sector needs when it's looking at creating new products or new services is always sort of that data that allows them to be able to assess the demand, assess that there is a market for new financial services and products. So I think that's definitely a core area which can't just rely on the data that government collects through different census or surveys, but it is definitely a space where more research institutions and more sort of institutions focused on statistics and economics, you need to sort of gather more insights as well. So absolutely there. And I don't know.
Totally, Aparajita, I mean, I was just sorry to, cut you in, but just imagine yourself as a woman entrepreneur, search for, access to where can I get fund. If you type that Google, you will not get any place where you can have all the options there, whether it is government schemes that you can get 1, 2, 3, these are the accelerators running, you can get grants 1, 2, 3, these are the investors who are looking 1, 2, 3. So there has to be one point. Imagine the challenge she has to face through. So I think that's something.
Yeah,
you're right. I mean, data needs to be there at one place somewhere.
Yeah. And I think not just, I mean, thinking back, it's not just what you can find online, right? It's also about, if I as an entrepreneur start something tomorrow from my home, who am I going to talk to financing about it? My usual go-to point will be bank, which I know doesn't quite cater to this segment right now. So I think there is a need for having a mass level awareness around this. Banks can cater to some of this, we can't expect them to actually fill a need that actually exists in that whole micro enterprise segment, which is much beyond what can be done by banks alone. So so I think that's definitely there. Hemant, did you want to add in a point there?
No,
okay.
I'm good.
Great. So I think moving on to talk a little bit more around the kind of let's say the wish list that you think in a post-COVID world, whenever that happens, hopefully sometime early next year, in a post-COVID world, do you see the kind of financing demands or change from women MSMEs, especially micro entrepreneurs? Do you think there is going to be there's going to be, and just to add some context, so we know during COVID there was a plethora of grant opportunities out there, but a lot of them focused on relief. A lot of them focused on building resilience, defined in the way a donor wants to define it, right? It's not a common understanding on the whole concept of resilience, unfortunately. We know that there is a real sort of gap when it comes to debt products, and definitely a huge gap when it comes to guarantees or equity. Do you see this sort of trend changing in the next year or 2 years of there being demand for specific kind of instruments over others? and also any kind of trends that you observe with the providers, right? So if banks look at this space or financial institutions look at this space, do you also see them looking at one space more over the other? And maybe Hemant, I'll address that question to you, since you run an accelerator program, incubator and accelerator as well, and you do probably come across a lot more startups that work in turn with micro entrepreneurs. Do you spot any kind of changes in the trends of how financial institutions and entrepreneurs are approaching, access to finance?
Sure, and I will try and do justice to that, Aparajita. Crystal ball gazing is always a dangerous thing to do. So the one trend that I find very heartening is that there are more and more startups who are able to take data and give you a curated solution for your needs, right? And let me be a little more elaborate on what I'm talking about. So as an example, there are earlier, in order to get a loan from a bank, right, you either needed to have a good CIBIL score, or you needed to have a good relationship with the banker, or you want to some other way of a network through which you could get a loan, right? Which for first-time entrepreneurs, a lot of women entrepreneurs, itself becomes a daunting task. The innovation that I'm seeing in this space is the use of social, demographic, and economic data by startups to make lending decisions. Right? And the other piece of good news related to that is that there are banks who are standing behind these startups, who are willing to give loans based on these data-driven decisions, right? Which I think suddenly opens up, if you want, the old boys club may perhaps be broken because of such data-driven decisions. And we have actually a couple of such startups in our incubator that we've been kind of working with. And I think this is just the beginning, where it's one way of taking the social context out of the equation, if you know what I mean, right? It's one way of trying to minimize the non-financial aspects of the credit decision making. And that is one innovation that I'm really hopeful about. So data-driven decision making regarding lending decisions. The other is that, again, with technology, suddenly dealing with smaller amounts of finance is not such a big pain. Right? It's not, you can deal with a lot more borrowers than you could earlier. And going back to the work that Richa's team is doing with collections, right? It's all ties into the ability to kind of create something which is much more widespread, much more scalable, much more easily accessible, right? And it's not scary because you need to walk into a branch where 100 people are going to look at you as to why your gungat is not like, 2 feet down your face types. But it just makes the whole process much easier and much more beneficial, much more neutral, a level playing field, if you will, for everybody around. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Thanks, Hemant. Richa, did you want to speak to any of those points, or probably I think we are moving towards the end of this discussion, so I'm going to add one more question before we end.
No, I think Hemant covered it. I earlier mentioned about the potential of digital finance. I think that's the key in terms of getting the capital and avoiding all these hassles of going to a formal finance institution. So I would suggest that the more of we have such programs which are promoting digital finance at the grassroots level, I think that can be a big enabler.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I wanted to go back to a point you made, Richa, earlier about collaborative frameworks, and just from your own experience, from yours and Hemant's own experience in the space of working with entrepreneurs, what kind of, if you had to sort of imagine a collaborative framework that really works and caters well to women entrepreneurs, and this could be both at the micro and small and medium level, what would that look like? Not just, I think it clearly goes beyond just having a directory of services or resources. What does that collaborative framework look like? And again, have you seen some good examples of that already happen if in small parts and partially, if you've seen that address getting through some existing collaborations, please do bring that up. And Richa, I'll go to you first and then ask you.
So, Aparajita, I have seen, in fact, one of the programs which at a scale level I've seen is the Internet Sathi program that Google and Tata Trust have been running. It's a fairly big collaborative program along with certain startups working on various schemes, not only just financial inclusion, but I've seen those working on energy, working on water, all these. So there's a big collaboration that has existed and it's working fairly well. What I mentioned to you was more from a digital financial inclusion aspect, where we are looking at NGOs who will be important from a community mobilization angle and also handholding of these women entrepreneurs. Then you have corporate segments, because corporates can only do proof of concepts, but different corporates coming together. There is a financial institution coming together, possibly a corporate working in the agriculture space coming and doing upskilling of women entrepreneurs. There's another corporate coming and working with the farmers. So all of them coming together. State liaising with the livelihood missions. There is wonderful state, like for example, Odisha State Livelihood Mission, such as fantastic program, or even at the National Rural Livelihood Mission. So tying up with them. As well as certain research and think tanks organization, because what we would like to do is share these grassroots learnings with the government in the form of white papers. So I think there's a lot of policy and advocacy work also needs to happen. Just to share a bit about the white paper bit, because we've shared these learnings with the government of India, stating that in fact the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, which is having bank accounts open for everybody, we saw that there were redundancy also existing. So we collated during our baseline surveys and assessment surveys and how we can reduce these redundancy through the digital Sakhi program, because we got them reactivated and we ensured the money was coming into the accounts. So these kind of collaborative frameworks are a mix of both implementation and policy advocacy. They give us the scale, so moving beyond doing proof of concept to making it a big scale program by joining hands. They give us sustainability, because these to give you an example again of digital Sakhis or any other card. So it can be a potential workforce for BFSI sector, because it's a feet on street. And they can also become entrepreneurs, because some of them would want to take up or run something like a digital Sakhi Seva Kendra, or government has common services centers. So some of them can run those centers. So I think these collaborative frameworks offer opportunities at multiple levels.
Yeah. Hemant, over to you on this.
Okay, so collaboration. So collaboration I've seen on multiple scales, and if you look at the debt and equity pieces separately, right, there are now almost all the large banks work with innovative startups in terms of the lending products. We've had a few, so there was a startup called Nira that was there in the cohort that Richa was with. That worked with blue collar workers, and there were several banks behind. So on the debt side, I'm already seeing a lot of collaboration happening, where innovative solutions are being partnered with the sources of finance, as well as the distribution channels that are required from a both disbursement and collection point of view, to enable larger number of loans to women entrepreneurs, as well as better servicing of these loans after disbursement. On the equity side, I've not seen too much collaboration happening, although I think initiatives such as the social stock exchange that is being worked upon now could actually be an avenue where although that's more oriented towards social entrepreneurs, but I think it could be a good beginning of seeing some collaboration on the equity side, and there are some innovative instruments that are coming out, like social development bonds or social impact bonds, that are also bringing together several players in the ecosystem, risk investors, impact investors, and implementation agencies. I haven't actually come across something that's specifically targeted at women entrepreneurs. These tend to be more broad-based in general. But I think, I've yet to speak to somebody who does not recognize women entrepreneurship as the next big thing that's waiting to happen, is already happening, sorry. But it is definitely something that I think we'll start focusing on a lot more in the future, 2021, hopefully. And I think initiatives like the Social Stock Exchange will also drive innovation on the equity side. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, thanks, Hemant. I think you did touch upon a couple of really interesting emerging areas as well. I guess the social financing space is definitely buzzing with looking at more either outcomes-based financing that can benefit women more specifically, or target women, impact metrics around women more specifically. And I think again, the social stock exchange may have specific areas that might come up as they sort of crystallize their initial findings and recommendations. I guess just one last question before we end. I know we are heading to time now. Is just in terms of the innovations that you have seen in terms of what's worked and what's not worked. Are there areas that you think that need to be dropped off now when it comes to financing for women? Because we still see it's almost that whole spectrum, and there's a lot of, it's almost like sometimes imbalanced approach of trying to tackle too many things, or trying to sort of provide two specific kinds of financing. Are there any areas that you think we should really stop doing as a sector or as institutions for women entrepreneurs? They don't need to be dealt the same card now.
That's a tough one, Aparajita. Let me think about that one. But, off the top of my head, I actually can't think of anything that I would say should be dropped off. I think while we've seen some healthy growth in women entrepreneurship in the last 20 years, I think there's still a fair amount of runway left to us reach parity with the population percentages. I think we should be trying all kinds of stuff. I actually can't think of something that I can think of to be dropped off.
Sure. Richa, I know not to put you in a spot, but if you have anything you want to add there.
So nothing to be dropped off, but I would state that, this expectation of women entrepreneurs to be only pursuing trades which are typical women oriented, like a pickle making or a tailoring, why not look at, those entrepreneurs and giving them capital who are into, let's say, ball manufacturing, something like for the, let's say, auto ancillary, or let's say into painting, why don't we painting as in maybe become a vendor for Asian paint, something like that, So why don't we look at, these kind of trades and upskill them into those particular space, and look at capital from that angle, how we can make it easier for them to access capital. So I think that's a shift of mindset which is required at an investor level, both from a corporate angle or from a larger individual level. So that's something I think we should look at. And this is not to say that there's anything wrong with pickle making, or because we've known some of the very large producer companies who are working on that angle, and it's been very empowering initiatives. But let's not look at women, when we talk about women, rural women entrepreneurs, they'll be doing only that bit. So that's the only piece.
No, God knows we all need better pickle and tastier pickles on our tables. But I'm with you on that, Richa. I think there's definitely, and that's one part of work that's very dear to me as well in my own organization, where we try to sort of build a more conscious gender strategy to gender disaggregate how people look at creating new strategies, new product services. Why just salons for women entrepreneurs in the city, and why just papad making and pickle making in the villages? So yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely to do more. We've seen, I think we've all seen some good strides being made. We know taxi companies that now finance women drivers to have or train drivers, which is not a typical women's job in a country like ours. But I think that we're seeing strides made in different sectors, but there's a lot more that can be done. And Yeah, absolutely. I think with that, and I don't know if I'm just going to reverse the table here a bit and say, do either of you have questions that you want to ask or put out there for our audience as well? Because I'm not sure exactly how the audience engages with this session, if there are questions that are coming up on a social media feed or somewhere. So if there's anything else you want, sort of last words or thoughts that you want to leave for our audience to think about as they go about in their jobs of creating a more equitable world for women entrepreneurs, maybe the floor is yours. Hemant, would you like to go first?
So the only thing I would like to add to what we've been discussing so far, and I think we've had a very well-rounded and comprehensive discussion. Thank you very much, Aparajita, for that. Is that our target should be that we should reach a point where we don't talk about women entrepreneurship, we talk about entrepreneurship. Okay, yeah. And that is what our goal should be. And for that to happen, there are financial and non-financial aspects that need to be tackled. And again, I would say that let us not focus only on the financial aspects. Let's focus on the non-financial aspects also. And I think there are several organizations, including LTFS, that are doing some very good work there. But I would set ourselves with a 20-year target of saying people will stop talking about women entrepreneurs. People will talk about entrepreneurs everywhere. People will start focusing on technology. People will start focusing on what the company is doing rather than who's running it.
Thanks, Hemant. Inspiring thought indeed. Richa, any last thoughts?
Well, like I mentioned, I think there are 2-3 key things. Having the technology with women, I think that's something which is very critical, and that's what we've tried to do in our bit. Promoting digital finance, and that's something which we've seen working, especially. And we started this during demonetization. It's working pretty well in COVID times. So I think that's going to be an area which we need to focus clearly. Both in the urban setting as well in the rural setting. And so for that to happen, I think there has to be seamless connectivity. While we've been running successfully in 5 states, but I would be very candid enough to state here that, we've had issues in terms of net connectivity, and we've given this feedback to NPCI that, sometimes, it's not working. So again, there is more reliance on USSD or feature phone based system. So there has to be work on those lines also. So it's very important that we look at digital finance as an enabler in terms of giving access to capital. It's also an enabler in terms of reducing the hindrances that patriarchy sets in, which I shared earlier in our program.
Yes. Thank you. With that, I know we are at time, so I'm going to hand over to the organizers. But thank you so much, Hemant and Richa, for sharing your thoughts.
It was a pleasure and an honor.
Hemant, thank you so much.